Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show.
If you should awaken, I will be there when you wake from your lovely
Welcome back. Today we're going to finish the chapters on the flood. But before I get into that, I would like to try to make a very important point here. I was listening to the radio last week and they were having a discussion about something. They were having a discussion about something biblical. Now, when you hear me speak of biblicists, what I mean by that are people who study and understand the Bible. The most amazing thing about a biblicist or the Bible itself is the fact that people believe that there are certain scriptures in the Bible that are of God. Someone told them at one particular time that God is the one that put these scriptures in here, and because he did so, they are the absolute gospel truth. However, the problem is not whether or not they're gospel truth or not, but the problem is simply man's interpretation of those truths. This is where we have a problem. I asked another friend of mine, he studies, and I said, how did slavery start? I had an idea, but he told me something very interesting. He said it was because of the sins of Adam and Eve. And I said, well, that's some interpretation. And before I got into a big debate or conversation with him about that, I simply decided to try to find and research where he got that from. And then once I started researching, I found something as equal as extraordinary, that certain interpretations of the text is saying that Noah, the same very Noah that we're speaking about in this chapter, and this is why I bring him up. One night, Noah had some drinks and went to sleep, and he was naked. His son Canaan entered the room, and Noah woke up in shock to find his son staring at him. That happened to me once, and I just went back to sleep. But anyway, Noah was so upset because his son Canaan had seen him, he cursed Canaan and told Canaan he will be a slave to his brothers. Now I'm wondering how that particular scripture wove all the way down to black people being slaves, but I kept looking. It was called the Curse of Ham, but it was in fact about Canaan. Later on, 1619, the first slave ships traveled, and the first slave ship was called St. John the Baptist. First slave ship was named after a Bible scripture. Then this was because biblicists believe that this whole thing is from the kingdom of Solomon and David in the 10th century BC. In 1200 BC, the Hebrews, Canaanites, and the Philistines went to war. In that war, the Hebrews was successful, victorious. However, they all had to live together, so they subjugated the Canaanites. Canaanites became slaves to the Hebrews. Eventually, this subjugation gave right for the Israelites to also subjugate the Canaanites. Somehow this translated from Canaanites to Africans by the Babylonian Talmud. In 500 AD, the Talmud specifically labeled the descendants of the Canaanites as the Africans, and then this was adopted by the Arabs. The point I'm trying to make is that the only thing that is true about God is truth itself, not the many interpretations thereof. We as human beings right now can tell a story on this side of town to one person and take it on down to 100 people that way, and by the time it gets to the end, it would be a completely different story. And that could happen over the matter of minutes. How exact are these stories going to be if they take thousands and thousands of years to be translated? And they will always be translated with whoever is in the position of power to put themselves in the... If you are in a position of power, you're not going to call yourself a descendant of a slave, because you're going to flip it simply because you wrote the literature. I was talking to someone else, and they believe that King James is the gospel. Well, that's only because King James of England ruled after the Roman Empire. So it's whoever is in power at the time sets the narrative. A lot of people are afraid of AI. Well, this is where I would like to advocate. Human beings do not have the ability to discern fact from fiction. Maybe a computer system can take all these stories and give a percentage of which one has the most validity, which one has the most consistency, because none of them are gospel once they come out of the mouths of men. I don't care if you think those men were anointed with some kind of special thing from God, because somebody told you that. You know, and we're living in a world of so much confusion. It's in the to talk about politics just for a second. You know, we have your Republicans on one side and your Democrats on the other side, and sometimes it seems that those representatives in those political situations are not quite that intellectual. Intellectual being that they don't seem to be using the tools that were given to them to govern with, like the Constitution, for instance, as a mechanism for their opinions. Well, the truth of the matter is, in a democracy, it's supposed to be for the people, by the people. So if you have some people within that democracy who are a little different than you are, it's still a part of the democracy. Everybody is not supposed to agree. The ones that you think are smart are supposed to be balanced with the ones that aren't so smart. That's what makes it. If all the smart people ran it, you know that would run amok. If all the not so smart people, quote unquote, that might be unfortunate as well. It's a blend of the two. Basically, what you do is you take your elected officials, you have an election, whoever wins the election, they represent those people for a period of time. What you cannot do is take a representative of a certain area, for instance, they vote that person in, and then once that person gets in, he says, well, now that I'm here, this is what I really think. No. They are supposed to represent the people who voted them in there, and that's just the way it goes. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that's not gospel either. It's simply opinions. And opinions in a democratic situation is what you're going to have to deal with, because it's a wonderful system if you have the patience and the ability to not believe that everybody has to agree with you. And biblicist, for you to believe that some of these gospel stories came from God, like I said before, the only truth about God is truth itself. And God is probably the only person that could be consistent with that. You cannot trust mankind with anything pertaining to opinions, because we all will have one. If we are to survive and grow as people, we need to understand that all people should be respected, and by the same token, the Bible's not gospel. Too many men, too many people, too many dynasties have been in power and have changed the narrative to suit them. Let me get back on subject and introduce you to chapter 30, the Ark of Noah.
Chapter 30, the Ark of Noah. His name was Atrihasis, whose name means exceedingly wise, or some called him Zuasudra, the biblical Noah, and was grandson of Anunnaki god Enki of Shuruppak and son of Marduk. Zuasudra carried much influence in the lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Enlil, the Anunnaki and son of Anu, had lobbied to destroy all life on the planet, with of course the obvious exceptions of the Igigi and the Atlanteans, who were all at this time preparing to evacuate the planet. For a short period of time they would leave Earth, setting up camp on the nearby surface of Lunar and the planet Mars, where they had plenty of time before the event to set up colonies. This would amount to a weekend camping trip or a much-needed vacation to those long-living beings from Atlantis and Nibiru. One day would amount to several years of Earth time. The callous and inhumane attitude of Enlil was not shared by his brother Enki, who happened to have a soft spot in his heart for the Claibornes and did not want to see them gone from this place. Enki was the Anunnaki's version of Dr. Frankenstein. He never saw a DNA sample he didn't love. Enki had always felt that he could replicate or reorganize any pattern of DNA and make it suit his ultimate desires. Noah was given the task of commanding not only one ship, but several of his vessels would be sent with cargoes of everything needed to regenerate Earth's ecosystem, because of the fact that gold was needed to repair Nibiru's atmosphere from years of radiation damage and poisoning. Earth was the only planet in the galaxy of the Milky Way where gold could be found. which was exactly why Mother Nature placed it within the jewel of her heart. So great still was the Anunnaki's need for particles of gold that they were never seen or depicted wearing gold on hieroglyphics or stone monuments for opulence or prestige. Vessels were loaded with every seed and seedlings known to the Anunnaki, while some vessels were loaded with samples of animal and insect DNA of all species. Species of the air and underworld, including all forms of rodentia. Every living thing except those from the sea. Sea life would survive and flourish. This was strategically mapped out so the vessels could be separated near the places where they planned their regeneration sequences. The new humanoid species would be left up to Enki to control his developmental experimentations, though they knew that their coastal palaces would be unsalvageable. They would be left to sit on the new ocean floors. The Atlanteans had their own agendas and were told where to go and what to do when they got there. Their survival would be left to their own magic and means. Enki made his sample deliveries on 4 vessels and insisted on staying aboard the vessel with the highest concentration of samples while the waters raged. However, Enki would not allow his science vessels to take such risk untethered. He suspended all of his science vessels to sky-ships, elevating them high above the waters with a steady eye on his experiments. Enlil traveled to Mars to relax for a while Father Anu stayed on space stations with the Agigis until all was over. Once the vessels were loaded, they could be dropped off onto the highest peaks on the planet. Some ships set so high on mountains that they never became buoyant and were quite disappointed because of this. Finally, all ships were in place, loaded with their cargoes and their primers. And then it began. First, there was a sudden quake, then an eerie feeling as all sounds of life came to a whisper and a soft wind. It was as if Mother Nature was giving her final hug and a kiss for good luck. Even she had to be promised that all would be okay as she struggled to prepare for all this. As stillness lingered for a moment, so began Phase 2. The planet seemed to grasp itself as if to prevent the core from being stretched out of its center or its extreme. Mountains began to quake and crumble under the pressure. Like a great body with an aching stomach, she rumbled as gas deposits ripped to the surface to relieve its internal pressures. Volcanoes all over the world began to burst in harmony, as if the conductor of a great orchestra was stroking his arm, commanding them to play their instruments to their extreme. In pursuit of a grand finale, animals shivered and flocks of birds densely rose as they blackened the skies, as if their spirits told them that their movements would be final and futile. As the planet Nibiru drew nearer, gravitational pull began to release the polar caps to the north. The vessels of Enki rose to the heavens. They began their assault on the polar caps to the south. Before the great glaciers of the world were dragged into the sea, flocks of birds gathered underneath a cloud-filled sky as the clouds and the birds shut out the light from the noonday sun, and the world grew dark and weary. It was as if the earth's body and soul was being frightened to death.
Without further delay, the flood.
Chapter 31. The Flood. As the earth flexed and stretched, it began to quake as Nibiru was nearing the point of absolute and complete correspondence. The Ajiji monitored the northern ice caps while struggling to maintain their position as their platform swayed back and forth, as many fell to their knees from the extreme oscillation. As soon as the Nordic caps began to slide, word was sent to the Anunnaki Imperium. The Anunnaki were synchronized to blast the caps on the south. With great trembling, the assault began. Within 20 minutes, all the major caps on both the north and the south had crashed into the ocean as the table of water rose hundreds, if not thousands of feet into the air, rushing towards all land masses. On Atlantis, hundreds of sky ships rose to the heavens in a great parade of coordinating discs. In spectacular fashion, they rose in unison. They hovered high above the capital city of Umdal as the fountains burst in triumphant and glorious waves. The palace and all landscapes began to sink beneath the waters. Above the island of Pan, ships hovered as the island succumbed to the same capitulation. On all continents, it was not just the shorelines that were engulfed, but also the entire mass of land connecting sea to sea, until the earth was wholly one great ocean, just as it once was 36 million years before. The irony was overwhelming. It was as if Tiamat was restored to her original glory and majesty before Nibiru attacked her millions of years ago in an attack of rage and jealousy to create Earth, as it then became land and sea. It was obvious that the orbit of Planet X was the catalyst for the creation of Earth. This collision was absolutely necessary for the future of mankind, setting the historical record straight and exposing the exaggerated reputation of Planet X as the great destroyer of planets. This event was indeed natural, perhaps to restore the balance in the universe, or perhaps something more divine in purpose. As the waters rose, vessels lurched hundreds of feet into the air, then drifted to parts unknown. On the science vessels, workers worked hard to steady all samples of DNA as the vessels were tossed and almost capsized. Some ships bore cargo that was to become the restoration of thousands of life forms, while on others there were hundreds of vegetable and food source seedlings. Under the circumstances, communication was nearly impossible, with the exception of the sky ships. The massive floating buoys were tethered to the so-called arcs to secure their safety. We do know that all vessels survived, even the hundreds of Atlantean sky ships, some that followed the Anunnaki to Mars and Earth moons, and others that found refuge within Earth's gigantic hollowed caverns, wherein many species of all kinds, including humans, found safety. We don't know if the 40 days were Earth days or Anunnaki shars. The rain pelted while the waves tumbled and the Earth moved like a great agitation, until all came to a stop some days later. And then it was beautiful. Oh, then it was beautiful. Vessels that were set high on mountain peaks in Mexico and Asia were never afloat because of their elevation, while others slid topsy-turvy down mountainsides, rendering the people inside upside down, until they were rescued by skyships. Hermes, who commanded the contingencies from Atlantis, found it hard to believe the mass disappearance of all Atlantis following its destruction, as they traveled to the land of Kim to rebuild their civilization.
subscribe and push the like button.
Thank you for coming today. Please subscribe. We're only going to get more interesting here, and only going to get deeper. Remember, the only thing truthful about God is truth itself, absolute truth itself. Thank you.
Hold my pillow tight and I think of you. Before you know, it seemed so long ago when I had you close to me.
Subscribe and push the like button.